So, welcome everyone. We just had the patch notes drop and we watched the developer live stream for Season 2, and there are some pretty massive changes here. We already have everything up on Maxwell. You can find the link in the description. It is a massive patch, as you can see. And it's not even everything in there. There's still some stuff missing. But they gave us a lot of the details about crit and vulnerable changes. The class balance updates are in there. Lots of the legendary and unique changes. So I'm gonna try to give you like the summary here, and then we're gonna make more dedicated videos for each of the individual topics because there's so much in this patch. But TLDR is they really nerfed crit and vulnerable heavily. So basically the way this works now is that crit just gives you like a 50% extra multiplier when you crit, and vulnerable gives you a 20% multiplier. So that's the baseline, 20% basically, and so does overpower. So we have that here. I'm gonna try to find this. Yeah, okay. So basically, all of these different modifiers now have a much smaller multiplicative scaling, and instead, the extra bonuses to them are additive damage bonuses, similar to damage to close, or damage like non-physical damage, or physical damage, or these kind of like stats. Basically, they're just additive extra bonuses. However, they did add a bunch of extra effects to start scaling some of those modifiers into multiplicative effects. For example, on the rogue, we have changed to the no witnesses legendary node, where it now says the ultimate skills gain additional 10% extra multiplicative damage from your damage with ultimate bonuses, and grant this bonus to all skills for 8 seconds when cast. And there are some similar examples on other classes. So basically every class has gotten some of these kind of reworks, where now you take one of those additive damage stats and actually transform them into a multiplicative scaling tool. So that is going to be quite interesting, I believe, where now you have like a lot more variety in the stats that you're chasing. In some cases, this can get really ridiculous because they're not necessarily capped. For example, I did some napkin math on this earlier, and you can probably get something like as much as like double damage or so from just stacking ultimate skill bonus, for example, on this no witness node. So this is one of those examples that can potentially be pretty busted. But there are others like that as well. In general, a few really strong builds got nerfs. So outside of this crit and vulnerable change, they also tuned down a lot of builds or fixed bucket builds. For example, Bulwark is gone. The Hydra burning bug was gone, but they buffed Hydra to compensate, so that might kind of even out for most cases. The lucky hit bone prison stuff for Medellin is gone. So yeah, that stuff is obliterated probably. Bone Spear also got a pretty heavy hit. And yeah, we're looking at like a relatively balanced meta now, it seems, because they nerfed a lot of the builds that used crit and vulnerable together, because those two effects are just way weaker. All of the other builds, especially dot builds and pet builds, are lifted way up. And in general, they also brought down the monster power to kind of compensate for that. So they said that the idea is that monster power and the player power is roughly similar to what it was before for the top builds, like those that already used crit and vuln, for example. This means that all other builds are just way better because the monsters were brought down. So that will be quite interesting to see. I think it's going to be a much more balanced meta between different types of builds with different scaling mechanisms, like dot versus crit versus overpower. And we're going to see how this will play out. In terms of the builds themselves, I would say all classes have really good stuff. So Barb in general got some pretty massive updates here, especially with Berserking but now being multiplicative, plus a bunch of other changes, especially Upheaval got some nice buffs, also through unique items. So definitely looking pretty strong here on the Barb, I think. Overall, there's a lot of really good stuff. Druid lost some of the power because of the Bulwark build, but in general, Druid is still looking really strong. I think Druid was overall fine and had like overall the most good builds, and that will probably continue to be that way. They also have some nice new tools with scaling their storm skills, for example. That is here, the Thunderstruck legendary node, for example, that now gives you 50% of the total amount of close and distant damage bonuses as a new multiplier. So that is like another equally crazy thing as the no witness thing on the rogue, for example. And a bunch of other nice little buffs for underused passives, etc. So that looks very nice. Necromancer, I mentioned Bone Spear is down, minions are up, and blood builds in general look pretty good. Both Blood Surge and Blood Lance I expect to be really strong. Shadow builds maybe somewhere in the middle, Bone builds somewhat down. I'm not sure exactly, but maybe Bone Spear will still be relatively good. And a bunch of other things you can do here with some of the changes. So Necros are in a pretty good spot, I believe, also because they benefit quite a lot from the vampiric powers, especially with like extra mobility and stuff like that. I think this will benefit Necromancers the most out of all classes. Rogues, interestingly, they fixed a bunch of bugged builds, but they did not fix the poison builds. In particular, Blade Dancer plus Bursting Venoms plus Poison Imbuement interactions have not been fixed. In fact, they buffed Bursting Venoms for whatever reason, and with dot builds just being better than usual, Bursting Venoms, Twisting Blade Rogue is going to be completely out of control. I expect it's going to be the best boss killer in the game, or at the very least near that. This is going to be absolutely busted. So they made it so that Bursting Venoms no longer requires a crit and has a better lucky hit chance. And they didn't fix the Blade Dancer bug where your spinning blades dealt 100% of the poison damage and not just 15 or something. So that is going to be crazy. And on top of all of this, they actually massively buffed Word of Arcane. Rain of Arrows is going to be a thing. I'm really pumped to play that. They gave it a lot of cooldown reduction, and they gave it movement speed, and they gave it ultimate skill damage, and there's also a vampiric power that reduces the cooldown on ultimate skills. You can get down to as little as like 27 seconds cooldown on your Rain of Arrows before preparation procs. And there's also a new unique that I have previewed where you can reset the cooldown even faster with some pair of boots. So I think Rain of Arrows is going to be an actual thing. That's going to be really good. I'm really pumped to play that. Like Rain of Arrows, Rapid Fire combo is going to be a really strong build, I believe. Outside of that, a few small buffs here to passives, to generators. Nothing really too crazy, but Twisting Blades, Poison, and Rain of Arrows looks really interesting. And also some stuff with Victimize passive. They massively buffed Victimize by allowing you to scale the explosion effect with your vulnerable damage bonus. So you can potentially do some pretty crazy shenanigans with that. But this is something to be explored later. Sorcerer overall looks really good, I think, because also of the resistance changes. I'm going to go into that in a second. But Sork's got a bunch of buffs here for burning builds, for example, Incinerate, Firebolt. I guess in general, Sork is looking strong, and also a lot of lightning builds got buffed. So basically, all lightning builds are way better now. They buffed Unstable Currents a bit, they buffed Ball Lightning. There is some changes to the Staff of Lam Esen, that gives you like the Charge Bolts effect. So Charge Bolts could be pretty good now. I think Arc Lash is going to be really strong because of Vampiric powers mostly, and because Lightning builds in general got some pretty massive buffs here. I think Lightning is going to be the overall best element, let's say, on the Sork. They are looking really strong, but I think that a lot of things are going to be viable. They also buffed, for example, stuff like some of the legendary nodes here, like Frigid Fate and Icefall, are like way more offensively themed and way stronger now, in my opinion. So for cold builds, for example, they also added some extra single target to Frozen Orb. They made Frozen Orb have a shorter distance so that it's easier to target enemies with that. Yeah, a bunch of reworked legendary nodes here. So Sork's got a lot of really good changes in my opinion. Now, talking about the resistances, this is like here in the general updates. They previewed that system. It's essentially like a Diablo 2 system now, where you have additive resistances and not multiplicative scaling resistances anymore. So you have a cap of 70% resistance that you're trying to hit, and you are supposed to hit that by around level 80. So you try to get that from your amulet and your rings, and then maybe a few armor pieces, or maybe some paragon, or maybe the jewelry, gem sockets, and stuff like that. So you try to hit 70% on all of your resists, and it seems like they have also done some tweaks on armor. They want you to hit the armor cap of 85% against physical. So resistances are only going to apply for the individual elemental types, and armor is only going to apply for physical damage now. So it sounds like you just cap everything, and then you're kind of fine. They also made it easier to cap armor now by buffing percent armor values across the board, aspect of disobedience, percent armor. You're going to have higher level power, higher item power items that gives you more armor next patch, and these kind of things. So I think reaching armor cap will be relatively easy outside of like tier 100 nightmare dungeons or so. So there's that. It sounds like probably a more straightforward and easier to grasp system. Just stack your resistances to 70, which is a new cap that can be increased to 85. Stack your armor to 85, and there you go, basically. So you just need to make sure that you get very close to that cap at least. Outside of that, lots of buffs to some of the endgame systems. So they already mentioned that they wanted to balance them out better so that they can now do not only nightmare dungeons, but also other content types. For example, they massively buffed Helltide chests, giving you plus 750% bonus XP. That is pretty massive. I'm not sure if that is enough to make it competitive, but it definitely sounds like worth investigating. And you get other perks like Fiend Roses, like the Forgotten Souls, that you will mainly get from Helltide now, once again. And of course the target farming of items and stuff like that. So Helltide has a reason to be played. And on top of this, you also need to do some of those endgame activities for the new bosses. So if you're not aware, there's 5 new endgame bosses, and each of them is dedicated to a certain endgame activity. So there's one for Helltide, there's one for Whispers, one for Legion and World bosses, one for Nightmare Dungeons, and then Uber Duriel that comes from 2 of the other bosses, one of which is Helltide and one is Whispers. So those are some things you want to farm anyway now, and now you get more XP while doing so. And they also buffed the Whispers pretty massively, especially in World Tier 1 and 2, plus 200% for turning in Grim Favors, and also individual Whispers are much more powerful now. I'm not sure if this is good enough to make Whisper leveling 1 to 50 better than Domain Tunnel leveling, unless there were some stealth nerfs to some of the dungeons or so, which I doubt. I think Domain Tunnels might still be the way, but I will investigate this. I'm going to keep guys updated on that. I think at least it could be somewhat viable to play this. And also, late game, probably not really the best source of XP for Whispers, but you also get tons of gem shards there for the gems they put in the sockets, and also tons of gold, plus the boss materials for one of the bosses that allows you to spawn Uber Duriel. So Whispers and Helltide are much more relevant now, and the other systems are also somewhat relevant. They showed us some other stuff, like some of the cool new uniques and some of the boss loot tables as well. So here's a unique, for example, the Scoundrel's Letters, that gives you some funny trap effects. I think one of the best ones they have previewed is this one, Flicker Step, that allows you to evade for enemies and reset your ultimate cooldowns by 4 seconds, up to 10 seconds every time you evade for enemies. That sounds not broken at all. There's also some funny stuff. They actually previewed this in a clip, but I couldn't find that now, where Boulder now rotates around you, so you can play like Hammered In Druid, basically. Yeah, a bunch of other uniques they have previewed, so they look really cool, really interesting, and they have also massively buffed a lot of uniques across the board. So either they have better stats, or they have stronger effects, or they're just like generally more useful. So most of the unique items are going to be more on this power level, or more on this power level. So they have usually quite good stuff, and you kind of want to chase them. And now you can as well. So we have like some of the loot tables here, for example, where each of those individual bosses that are part of the new endgame now drop certain items. So you can farm them and you can get what you need, basically. So here's the Beast in the Eyes, for example. That's some Nightmare Dungeons. And yeah, we have the Duriel loot table somewhere. Here's the Varshan loot table, for example. The Uber Duriel drops like a lot of the new uniques mostly, and the Uber uniques, so he's going to be the most valuable, and that is like the main target that you want to farm. We'll see exactly how that system works. They have not actually shown that in action, but I guess it's just you do some of the endgame activities, you get the materials, you summon the boss, and that's it. So it should be pretty straightforward. Yeah, outside of that, there's a lot of stuff to unpack here in those patch notes, so I will have to go over them in individual videos, but I think this pretty much covers most of the big changes that are coming here. Maybe chat can help me. I'm live on stream right now if there's anything that I missed, but I think we basically got it. So I'm going to keep you guys updated with a lot of stuff from the individual parts of these patch notes. So there's a lot to talk about with new builds, with how builds change exactly. I'm going to do a lot of theory crafting in the next days, so obviously stay tuned for that. We're going to be updating the Maxwell guides as well. So we have a lot of builds here and potentially make some new ones. But yeah, we have some work to do here, guys, to bring all of these to Season 2 level. So let's see. And with that, I'm gonna conclude the summary here. So hope you liked this. I think the Season 2 is looking really amazing. I am very pumped to play this. I'm gonna try a lot of really cool builds. Like these patch notes, if you read through them and the original balance changes, at least they made me very excited to try certain builds. And that is really what I'm looking forward to, especially with the much faster leveling now. Getting to level 100 much quicker allows you to also try and experiment with different builds. And then also have like more interesting item progression with like the higher item power ceiling and all that stuff. Yeah, and that's it for the summary. So hope you enjoyed it and see you guys next time.